Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
And greetings. Thank you so much for joining us today, right here on another edition of Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. And as our listeners know, and thank you so much for joining us once again, we have a variety of topics that are linked to natural living, and we have guests from far and wide. We had a veterinarian on from New Zealand, and we have people from all over the country. But today, we're very happy to have a show that is based right here in our local environment. For those of you who are web listeners, thank you for joining us as well. For our Long Island listeners, we're speaking right to you today because our guest, Major Peter Janow, is a lifelong Long Island resident, and he was raised in Cold Spring Harbor. He attended Boston College and the University of San Diego before attaining the rank of Major in the Marine Corps and serving our country as a pilot and international affairs officer. Major Janow is now retired, and he is currently the co-founder of One Solution Consulting. He also functions as an adjunct professor at Stony Brook University and is also currently the executive director of the environmental group known as the Coalition Against an UnSound Crossing, and that's going to be our topic for today. He is an conservationist and volunteers for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Save the Sound, the Nature Conservancy, and Friends of the Bay, right here in Oyster Bay, Long Island. Peter will discuss environmental, economic, and other issues that need to be considered in terms of the plans to build a major bridge tunnel complex that would span Connecticut to the North Shore of Nassau County, Long Island. So thank you so much for joining us today, Peter.
It's my pleasure for being here with you, Ellen.
Now, it sounds like you mentioned, you have been involved in conservation and been a real proponent of our natural environment. Sounds like all your life.
Well, yeah, and that's, I think, a case for many Long Islanders. We're blessed to live in an absolute unique and beautiful part of the country and actually part of the world. And I appreciate your Marine Corps plug. But one thing that means is I've been around the world many places, multiple times, got to experience a lot. And I'll tell you, I keep coming back to Long Island because it's just so beautiful. And most of us know it's something that we need to cherish and we need to respect, and we need to work to continue to keeping it as nice as it is.
Yes, it is. And I'm sure since you were a child here, as I was, we really have firsthand, as well as through science, because I also work at Stony Brook University with the Department of Family Medicine. You know, there's so much research on the fact that our biodiversity has really decreased here on Long Island. I mean, you might remember, like I do, collecting newts in the streams here. Go try to find one now. It's pretty difficult.
You know, you raise a good point, because one of the concerns that we have, and we'll talk more about this as we discuss the proposal that's coming out of senior government offices in New York State, is the environmental impact this is going to have. And we've seen some benefits. We have whales coming back to the water and porpoises, but we talk about things like snakes, frogs, toads, things that live in and around our estuaries and waterways. Absolute major decline over the years in that area. And that's something I really think we need to be focusing on, paying attention to, and not adding more stressors to.
I totally agree. Well, the focus right now in our conversation today is a group that you are the executive director of, and I know that's a big job, but it's not like a big job that you're getting paid huge amounts of money for. This is something you're doing really as a service to our area and because of your personal commitment, and that is that you're the executive director of CAUC, which stands for Coalition Against an UnSound Crossing. What does that mean? What does that name even refer to?
Well, a few years ago, out of the governor's office was a statement and proposal to potentially look into building a crossing, whether that be a tunnel or a bridge or a combination thereof, from North Shore of Long Island somewhere to either Connecticut or to Rye, New York, and Westchester. That proposal has been narrowed down a bit because the governor's office did commence on a feasibility study, and they narrowed the options down pretty much to a tunnel going from Oyster Bay, Long Island, to Rye, New York. And there were a few people, Heather Johnson, who works at Friends of the Bay, Bill Blyer, who's a retired Newsday reporter, and John Taylor, currently a trustee in the village of Bayville. They got together with a few other folks and recognized, hey, the governor's serious about this, so we need to put a group together to bring a lot of folks like ourselves who don't want to see North Shore of Long Island or any part of Long Island impacted in a negative way like a bridge or tunnel would. So earlier this year, in earnest, the efforts were put together to create the organization, which we've done. And they looked for someone who was energetic, perhaps a little charismatic like myself, to go out there, be a public face, talk about the issue, and help run the day-to-day operations, because we know, as a Long Island community, this plan, as it stands, is not a good plan for the people of Long Island, certainly not for our communities, and certainly not for the environment.
Well, I want to remind listeners that you're listening right now to Herbally Yours, right here on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. By the way, you can also listen on iHeartRadio. I'm Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, and my guest today is Peter Janow, and we are discussing the potential of a bridge tunnel crossing from Connecticut to Long Island. Now, let's give the other side of the study, the other side, why would people want to have this? Because certainly there must be a push for it as well.
Well, some of the talking points that we've heard so far is there's an interest in having a tunnel or crossing for people to get to Connecticut or New England, what have you. And I'll just say that the proposal they've chosen, going from Oyster Bay to Rye, New York, doesn't really help minimize anyone's commute that much. So the initial logic of, hey, we can shave some time off getting into New England or Connecticut, doesn't really hold water when you see the location that they've chose. On top of that, though, if you're looking at a $20-$25 one-way ticket price for your basic car or SUV, that's prohibitive for a lot of folks to have a $50 round-trip ticket, maybe to save 20 minutes or so. Another interest that the government of New York and the governor's office has proposed is it's going to help with commerce going between Connecticut and Long Island. And of course you can look at that and say, hey, there might be some validity or value to that. But as soon as you increase, and I'd say dramatically increase, the amount of vehicle traffic, large trucks, diesel belching trucks, you're creating that environmental impact that we don't want. And certainly we can look at every other bridge tunnel project and you see the negative effects of that bridge or tunnel project in the communities that it's been erected or built.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And there are ways across. For instance, I personally, if I want to miss that whole traffic scene, and I go to Connecticut all the time because my partner, Dr. Eugene Samprone, is there, and I do presentations at the University of Bridgeport. So I'll just usually go out and take the ferry across, which seems a lot less destructive if they wanted to have another route across. And you can take cars on that.
And, that's one thing that many folks are proposing is to say, on occasion when people want to make the trip, people are very happy, and I'm glad to hear you're one of them, I am too, who take the ferry because it's a nice outing. You might not be in a rush. Hey, have some fun. But to think that the numbers will be there, and we'll talk more about the numbers if you like, they're not going to work out, and you'll build an exceedingly expensive tunnel. that doesn't have the throughput that will make it financially viable, on top of the negative environmental impacts that it'll impose on us. So for all reasons across the board, the proposal really does not make sense.
You know, in medicine, what we often talk about is that there are certainly pharmaceutical agents that have an action. But then when we look at the overall picture, what is the cost benefit? And I think that's what really plays in here, because certainly when we look at it from an environmental perspective, from a quality of life perspective from Long Islanders in terms of humans, as well as the massive amount of environmental destruction, not just when the bridge and tunnel is eventually there. What would it take to put it there?
You know, excellent question. That's getting right to one of the main hearts of the matter is right now the proposal, based on the feasibility study and their own numbers, shows the bridge will be anywhere from $35 to around $50 billion. And certainly it's going to be on the higher end, if not exceed the $50 billion mark. But we'll use that for discussion. Right now, when you look at individual investors, private investors, there's very little to no interest from the private investors to get involved because, again, using their own numbers from the feasibility study, at a minimum, there'll be a $1 billion annual shortfall, i.e. more debt incurred by this project. So for the state, we're looking to take around $50 billion of resources and funds, tie them up in a tunnel that no one wants, and it can't even pay for itself. And above that, it's going to add $1 billion of debt annually. So when we talk about the financial model for this tunnel proposal, clearly it's in the red to begin, and it's in the red throughout its lifespan. And that's something I don't think is palatable with any taxpayer in New York State who already sees a large state tax burden and wants it reduced, not increased. And the bridge will certainly increase our tax burden.
So that's an interesting point. What you're saying is that this issue, even though it directly impacts me, and I for full disclosure, folks listening to the radio, you may know already, I live in Oyster Bay. I live right, what are they going to do, move my house? It looks like it would come right under my house. But that's not why we're doing the show, because it's not just for the residents that are local. It really is going to impact our entire area from both a financial standpoint and an environmental standpoint.
Again, you're bringing up another great point. One of the benefits of living on Long Island is we are a Long Island. We are an island community. Building this tunnel or bridge, and that's why we call it crossing, because the tunnel, or sorry, I should say the bridge option is still on the table. Building any sort of crossing doesn't let us be an island. And if we become more of a thoroughfare for Connecticut and New England, I don't know who wants that. I haven't met one person who actually wants that. And clearly when you look at the urban growth and stressors that come from projects like the Whitestone and Throgs Neck Bridge, look at what happened in Bayside. And I come from a family of 3 generations of Bayside residents before we moved out to Cold Spring Harbor, and we can attest to the negative and urban stressor impact that the Whitestone and Throgs Neck bridges brought. They didn't bring a reduction in traffic. To the contrary, a dramatic increase in traffic and congestion and pollution into the Bayside area. And we know for sure that that's going to happen out here. Whether that be Oyster Bay or Kings Park or some other location, it's not going to be good for Long Island, certainly not North Shore, certainly not Suffolk County, certainly not Nassau County.
Well, thank you very much, and hold that thought. We're going to take a little break right here, and I'd like to remind you, listeners, you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live online at nccradio.org or on iHeartRadio. For more information, you can send us an email at whpc@ncc.edu. Stay tuned. Herbally Yours will be right back.
When I grow up, I want to be a new pair of blue jeans.
When I grow up, I want to be a kid's first computer.
When I grow up, I want to be a glass countertop in a new home.
When I grow up, I want to be a kid's best